Judgment. As Helen said last night, I was going to spend a little time talking about this fourth part of the definition of mindfulness. But actually, after having several meetings today and some really powerful conversations with several people about a particular subject that kept coming up, I decided to give a little bit different of a talk tonight. And it's one on the inner critic. And so, it's not a completely different talk since the inner critic is the deliverer of judgment most often. But it's going to be a little bit different than I had anticipated. So, just to review mindfulness, paying attention to the present moment on purpose without judgment. And I don't know about you guys, but I think it's pretty common. How often we find ourselves, the bells ring, we take a breath, we begin to find our breath, we begin to find body sensations, and the next thing you know, that doesn't feel very good. That fan, that fan. And there's the judgment begins. And so it is often, actually paying attention on purpose to the present moment without judgment that actually becomes a different sort of challenge. So I know I had several conversations this morning in which there was a lot of identification with each other. But I'm curious, honestly, how many of you guys, how many of us experience judgmental mind frequently? Yeah. And how many of us is that judgmental mind focused on the self? Yeah. And how about others? For how many of us is the judgment focused on others sometimes? And how about the present moment or the situation? Yeah. And, I intentionally ask you guys to be willing to raise your hands because I do think it's powerful when you see a whole room. And I can honestly say I've never asked that question where not 99% of the people don't raise their hand every time. I mean, this is part of the human condition. And yet, it is an incredibly painful part of the human condition, I think. So, what kind of things does your inner critic say? Yeah. I mean, there's certainly things like, oh my God, don't eat that. Oh God. Or, really, you're going to wear that? Oh, I wouldn't wear that. Or, did you really just say that out loud? You don't know the answer to that. You're not really smart enough to fill in the blank. I mean, it knows no boundaries. Or you're walking up some stairs and you trip a little bit. And there's no voice. It's just this disproving energy. The inner critic has lots of ways of showing up. And I really think it, for most of us, knows no bounds. There isn't a subject in our lives that it's off limits to. I remember, and a few of you have heard me talk about this, it was just so loud. The first year I started teaching at the university, I got real intimate with my inner critic. So I had a fairly long commute, and so on the way up to teach, the inner critic would begin this. You didn't read so-and-so. You're really going to give that lecture and you didn't read? Oh, you know you're going to get asked questions about you really are not going to be able to cover that. And on and on and on about all the ways that I might not be prepared. And then I would go and teach a 3-hour lecture. And then I would drive back home. And on the way home, the inner critic would regale me with every single thing I said during that 3 hours, just run through the lecture one more time, scrutinizing each part of it to decide, was it okay, or might there be some repercussions for whatever you said about some psychopathology. And that's the way it went for quite a long time. And actually, I'm going to say some negative things about my inner critic, but I actually have come to love my inner critic. My inner critic is responsible for my daily mindfulness practice, and for that, I will always be indebted to it. So, there are basically 2 typical ways I think about judgment, and therefore work with judgment, and especially when it's self-judgment. And I was thinking about talking about the other one, which is working with preference, and we might get to it, but I kind of doubt it. So what I really want to talk about is how judgment is a misguided attempt to protect us. And I'm going to say that again. Judgment via the inner critic is actually a misguided attempt to protect us. And one of the reasons I want to talk about this is because actually what I really want to talk about is compassion. So I think that in order to talk about judgment as a misguided attempt, self-judgment, as a misguided attempt to protect us, I think I'm going to read you. I wasn't sure if I was going to read you this or not, but I think I will. A letter that I wrote to my inner critic. And I will thank Elizabeth Gilbert and our Sangha, because Elizabeth Gilbert happened to write a letter to fear. And I thought, I think my inner critic could use a letter from me. So in the spirit of talking about this, I'll read this to you, and maybe you can relate. Dear inner critic, I thought it was time for some changes in our relationship, so I thought I'd write you a letter and let you in on this fact. You see, you've been with me for a long time. As a matter of fact, as long as I can remember. In part, you were created from other people's voices, other people's comments, opinions, and beliefs about me, from the various adults and kids that I came in contact with during my early years. You have grown and developed right alongside all the other various parts of me, and here we are now, practically inseparable. I know, inner critic, that you were born and evolved in order to protect me so I wouldn't hurt. Early on in life, you witnessed my sadness, my fear, and my self-doubt at times when others misunderstood me, or became frustrated with me, or simply ignored me. You have been my outer shell to the world, the superhero of judgment, the critic that will cast judgment wherever judgment is needed, so that I'm okay. Out of your own confusion, you've rushed in to rescue me by judging me. You vowed that you would never let others hurt me by judging and criticizing me again. You would make sure to point out every flaw, every mistake, every way in which I could improve so that I wouldn't be harmed by others again. You've been a very, very busy inner critic. But because I've lived with you for so long, I know that all of this judging is just a misguided attempt to make me feel better. You might wonder how it is I know this. Well, while you've been busy making judgment, I have been quietly spending a great deal of time learning to hear you, understand you, and finally to see your true intent for me. I know that you have been trying to protect me in a very strange and unusual way. But alas, it has now come time, my dear inner critic, for us to change roles. It is now time for me to begin taking care of you, for me to protect you. This approach will be unfamiliar to you. You may not even know the word. It's compassion. My approach will be compassion. So as not to catch you off guard, inner critic, I'll explain myself. You know, our typical dance has gone something like this. I will do something or say something. It really could be anything. And you become fearful and respond to me with criticism toward my action. And then I usually feel bad, dejected, and I try to pull myself up and keep going, vowing to you to do better next time. This last part is the part where the change will come. Instead of becoming dejected and feeling bad and trying to do better, I will respond by taking care of you. I will offer you compassion. This will come in the form of a gentle energy, a recognition of your voice, and a reminder to you that I'm okay, that the days of needing you to criticize me, to keep me safe from outer harm, are over. You see, inner critic, you may be surprised to hear this, but I love you and I care about you. I wish you no harm at all and no ill will. I wish for you only peace and to know the end of suffering. So we'll begin this new journey together. Your voice will arise, oh, most definitely. But I will offer you a simple message. I care about you and I love you. My intent is for this role change to last for the rest of this lifetime. I know it will not be easy for you, inner critic, to stop judging me. You've been at this a really long time. So I know your voice will still arise, and I will treat this as an opportunity to say hello and to wish you peace. Through this process, we'll discover a new relationship born of compassion and awareness. And this may sound super strange to you, inner critic, but I really do look forward to continuing this journey with you. Much love and gratitude for all your well-intended but misguided care, Stephanie. So, you know, there really isn't an exception to love and compassion. There isn't really secretly a part of us that doesn't deserve compassion. There isn't a piece that we want to lop off and fight with or try to push away. It doesn't work. And most of us have tried it. When some negative judgment comes up about ourselves, we avoid it by eating or drinking or working harder or judging someone else as a way to feel superior again. We've tried a lot of things as human beings, and they don't seem to work. Some of you might be familiar with Tara Brach's work, and Tara Brach does a beautiful job of talking about how the inner critic isn't born necessarily out of malicious parenting or heinous abuse and neglect. The inner critic is born out of just the really small things that happen on a daily basis where someone's just a little bit misattuned because they got a lot of stuff going on in their own life. Or they don't really stop and pay attention. And when we're really super little and we don't have a lot of defenses, we start putting on that spacesuit. Every time somebody hurts us, we zip it up a little bit more, and we add this protective layer. And one of the main parts of this protective layer is the critic. And that's why I called my inner critic a superhero. It delivers judgment wherever judgment's needed. If really deep down inside, someone's threatening to me because I think they're better than me, it will come out with judgment. And I won't even know I'm feeling less than them. It's done a great job for most of us. but it hasn't gotten a lot of love back. So, for most of us, it goes something like this. We spend a large part of our life really unaware it's in operation. It's like a superhero incognito. Like we don't actually know it's operating. We might be judgmental about others, or we might be judgmental about the present moment, but we don't really know that's the inner critic delivering it. We don't really, and every time the inner critic is hard on us, we've become so merged with it, we don't really even hear it. We just believe we're that inept or that inadequate. But then, for those of us on this strange path of mindfulness, we start to wake up. And we sit down, we ring a bell, and we commit to starting to hear the thoughts that run through our head. And most of us come face to face with our inner critic. And it's through mindfulness and awareness that we really begin to hear what it's saying. It's no longer incognito. It's no longer doing its job without our awareness. But I don't think we can stop there. And this is where compassion comes in. Because when we develop a mindfulness practice and we begin to notice it, and we try to move back to the breath like we do with all other thoughts that aren't as challenging to work with, it doesn't seem to work that well. We go back in our life, we might actually have a pretty peaceful sit, and then the next day we go to our job and somebody looks at us with doubting eyes, and wham, there it is again. And so there has to be another tool in our toolbox besides mindfulness to be with our inner critic. And that's where I think compassion comes in. We're not going to rid ourselves by hating our inner critic. We're going to learn to make peace with our inner critic. And we're going to learn to take care of our inner critic, just like we take care of others in our lives that we love. And, when somebody we love doesn't exactly get what we're saying, we don't kick them to the curb. We try to hang in there with them. We try to find some compassion. And our inner critic deserves that too. So it goes something like this. I'm walking up the stairs, trip, stunned, disappointing energy arises, and I relax. And I say, oh, I care about this. I care about this suffering. I care about you, inner critic. Whatever it is, it has a gentle energy about it that is really different than the harsh energy of the inner critic. We put our arms around the inner critic and we say, I can be with you. I can feel what this feels like without creating more story. Just simply make contact and allow its presence. So this really is a tool. And as we begin to practice, as we begin to cultivate this voice of compassion, sometimes it doesn't feel real at first. Sometimes it just feels rote. And some of you have heard me say this is my favorite line that I have ever heard Sharon Salzberg say. She says, trust the merit of the process. Trust the merit of the process. Start practicing the voice. Start practicing saying in response to whatever harsh, judgmental comment comes up about you or somebody else. Oh, this is my suffering. Because when we're judging others, we're suffering. We are, all that does, whether we are inferior to someone else or whether we are superior, all it does is create disconnection and the illusion that we're not connected. And that, by definition, is suffering. So whenever the critic arises, just practice. Practice your new compassionate voice. Because truly, when we drop judgment, the whole entire world opens up. When we experience a moment, be it a minute or miraculously even a day without judgment, the world is expansive and it's open. It's open to being experienced. There's nothing that can't be experienced. And when judgment's not present, we can feel connected, truly connected, with an open heart, not just love for those that we've deemed ours, but love for everyone, for everyone. Two-legged, four-legged, eight-legged, winged, finned. And most importantly, we can feel love towards ourselves, which for most of us is often missing. So I think that I will stop there